Hey, I'm recovering from my jet lag. It's coming along pretty well. This is something I wanted to report on. I was in England. I was in a bunch of places. I was in Portugal, Turkey, Morocco, and the UK and England. And England is a trip. They're all a trip, but England is the most bizarre, exotic place of all. They publish a lot of newspapers, and I can read them. And I saw this. Let's see if this. Can you see this? Let me see if I can. Here we go. Special effects. It says insuring against climate disaster. And they've got, you know, the normal fluctuation. You can see some years really no insurance payments, some years more, but it fluctuates. But there's two big spikes. You probably can't read that. One of them is Katrina, Hurricane Katrina. The the climate fraudsters are claiming that one of the reasons we need to follow their dictates, whatever their dictates may be from moment to moment, is because of the grand and amazing huge payouts that have had to be made on insurance claims. There's just one problem. Katrina, if you remember back in 2005, was caused by an engineering failure, not the weather. Now, Mississippi got hit very hard by a storm. I think they had category 5, and that was real. But the city of New Orleans only had category 3. And the reason the city of New Orleans flooded is because the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers failed to design, build, and maintain the levees properly. It's all documented in this book, which I highly recommend, Words Whispered in Water. I am cited numerous times in this book. If you're one of the informed people that already knows that the storm did not destroy New Orleans, faulty engineering did, and then 10 years of lying by the mainstream news media and the federal government. I know it's a shocker, but one person persisted, Sandy Rosenthal, and compelled the U.S. Army Corps, compelled the news media to look at the real engineering by legitimate engineers, and it was clear that the levees failed in about 50 places. They didn't fail because the storm was so huge. It wasn't huge in New Orleans. It failed because the levees weren't designed correctly. They weren't built correctly. That's the story there. And the climate fraudsters are going to undo all that heavy research that was done because they need a reason. See, pay out, pay out, pay out, pay out, kind of normal fluctuations. They got this big spike. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, there it is. That's clear. This huge spike. And they need that to be a climate disaster. So they want to throw out all the forensic engineering research that was done and proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. I mean, even the corrupt New York Times, the corrupt Wall Street Journal, the corrupt Washington Post, corrupt CNN, the corrupt BBC, they have all given up on the lie that it was a storm that destroyed New Orleans. Even the AP, this is unbelievable. This is actually current news. The Associated Press has, in their instructions to journalists, advised them, do not call what happened to New Orleans damage from a storm. It was damage from an engineering failure. So, but the climate maniacs are going to persist no matter what. I think I have some notes here. They're going to help me. If anybody's still confused about global warming, you should be informed that they've changed it to climate change. Why? Because the planet is not warming in all places. In some places, it's getting colder. They don't want to tell you that. The other thing they don't want you to know is there's a scientific discipline called paleoclimatology. And if you spend even 15 minutes looking at the basics of that well-established science, you will learn that dramatic variations in weather have been taking place for millennia, well before industrialization. Now, that said, the modern corrupt corporate multinationals are doing grave harm to the planet. mainly human beings, by putting things like mercury and lead and arsenic and glyphosate and thousands of other compounds unregulated into our food chain and into our environment. Into our environment, and it ends up in our food chain. That's a real problem. And you'll notice nobody talks about that anymore. Yeah, there's a few people talking about glyphosate, but nobody talks about industrial pollutants anymore. We know who does the industrial pollution. We know where the factories are. We know what their addresses are. We know who owns them. We could send a writ to them right now, shutting them down, or at least forcing them to, comply with some kind of environmental integrity. But we're not doing that. Instead, we're screaming about climate change. You see how that scam works? All the energy of the environmental movement has been deflected from something important, something useful, something valuable, to complete hot air and smoke. And that was designed and that was engineered. And these guys have endless money. I mean, here we go. This is the centerfold of the London Times. What's that worth? Right. That's probably $100,000 right there, if not more. The other thing you need to know about climate change and carbon emissions is they're basically dismantling our energy system. And again, I am no fan of the oil and gas companies, and I'm on the record for decades pointing out their misdeeds. But for better or worse, a lot of people's survival depends on that, on gasoline and natural gas, especially the poor. We can, here in the developed world, we could absorb, $5 a gallon, $10 a gallon. You go to some poor places, and that's going to cause starvation and death. It's also going to line the pockets of the oil companies because now they can jack their prices up to the moon. We're creating a catastrophe that's going to end in the result of the lowering of living standards for the comfortable, and the death and malnutrition, starvation, and absolute misery for billions of people. It's not a great system we have, but it's the only system we've got. And if we turn it off, because it's not like you just casually drill for oil and refine it and transport it. I mean, you need a huge capital investment. You need a lot of experienced, well-trained people to make that happen. And these climate maniacs are basically starving. For instance, Princeton University, the school of idiots, just decided that they were going to sell all their stocks in oil companies because that's going to somehow improve the world. Well, they're going to starve people like that. And, we got the pension plans that are run by leftists and other colleges and, cities and states. I mean, it's just going to be an avalanche. And so we're basically going to starve the oil and gas industry of capital. And they're going to do a calculation and say, well, we could open new oil fields, or we could just triple or quadruple or quintuple the price of what we've already got in our drilling, and we'll still make the same money either way. So, okay, we'll do it that way. That will kill the poor, and which I think is part of the plan, because this whole thing was cooked up from a very high level, and it is about social control, and it is about population control, which is a euphemism for genocide. I know it's hard for these, fuzzy-headed leftist liberals to imagine that they are engaged in genocide. But if you're going to quadruple or quintuple or 10 times the cost of fossil fuels, you're killing people. And you're killing a lot of people, and you're starving a lot of people, and you're creating a lot of misery. One of the places I was in Morocco, and they're having a drought in this particular part of Morocco. Not the first drought, won't be the last. And so to get over the drought, they're pumping water so they can irrigate their crops. Well, that unfortunately, takes gasoline, and it takes diesel, and their diesel prices have tripled. So a lot of families can't afford to do it. And that's at the prices that we're at now. And if we, shut down all the fossil fuel industry, prices are going to go much, much, much higher. And again, an inconvenience to people that are well off, death, um, poverty, grinding poverty, starvation, malnutrition for a couple billion people. But of course, the maniacs who are screaming climate change couldn't care less, or are unable to think it through. So anyway, it's just so interesting that they never rest, right? They're going to attribute this huge payout in insurance claims. They're going to say, well, here's an economic reason why we've got to stop carbon emissions. Um, Carbon emissions are not the problem. Lead, mercury, arsenic, um, glyphosate, and probably 1,000 plus other compounds and chemicals that we allow corporations just to spew out without any regulation. That's the real problem. And notice nobody's talking about that anymore. That's off the table. So anyway, this brass check with some insight from my travels, and I hope you found it interesting.
Brass Check TV, free to you, not free to us. We've got a server bill, we've got an email software bill, we've got a tech helper bill, and that happens every month. So to everybody that is supporting us financially, that's paying for their subscription in one way or another, we really appreciate it. If you're not, consider doing so. Everybody's got money for the newspaper and the cable bill and all that. Do you have money for media that's actually serving you? That's really the issue here. And when you help us, it allows us to get this information out to the world. So thanks to all our supporters, and if you're not a supporter already, please consider becoming one.